Hey, this is Troutbitten Tips. Thanks for joining me. Today, let's talk about floating the sighter. So there might be kind of nothing more misunderstood in the tight line game than floating the sighter, I think. But it's a really great problem solver. You have a tactic that can just do some really unique things. You can get some excellent presentations that you can't do any other way. But there's a lot more to it than just laying line on the water. In fact, if you don't kind of have a plan, think it through, and really understand what's going on when you float the sighter, then things can pretty easily get screwed up. So let's talk it through. There's a lot here. Are you ready? Here we go. So I'm pretty excited about this one. There's a lot to kind of show and tell. I want to point out, like I always say, nothing here at Troutbitten stands alone. There's everything we'll talk about today is really, we've kind of worked up to this point. The category, the fly fishing the mono rig category on Troutbitten is there for you. There are 1,400 articles, podcasts, and videos now as this resource. And so it's really important to kind of understand stuff that comes before this. Another thing too is we're not really going to fish today. This is about trying to show you some things more than the fishing. Josh is actually going to be standing in the water where the fish would be. We're trying to get angles, trying to show you what I'm talking about. If you want to see this kind of stuff in action, we have the Fish and Film series. And that's all about the fishing. Go check that out too. We're running out. All right, what we mean by floating the sighter is we're laying it down. We're putting the sighter on the water instead of keeping things up. It's just that simple. Again, we're going to walk through all the good reasons to do this, but that's what we're talking about. Taking the sighter, which is of course your colored line, we know what that is, and you're putting it on the water with a purpose. You shouldn't do this accidentally, right? You need to have a plan for it. You don't just go, oh, well, my sighter laid down that time. You should have a good idea why and how you're going to do it. So let's first talk about what I call the tight line advantage. The reason we tight line in the first place, the reason we use this is a standard mono rig build. I'll get more into the leader in a little bit, but the reason we tight line is so that we can be in control, pure tight if we want to be, to the nymphs down there. And so this is not floating the sighter. This is tight to my nymphs. So you can see I'm not all that tight. The sighter isn't completely straight and tight the whole time. The point is that rod tip is in control of everything. There is a tight line or a straight line from my nymph to the rod tip. So the rod tip becomes the lead point, that toe point, kind of that anchor point. The fly is tracked toward the rod tip. It's a good thing. It's a very good thing. Did a video not too long ago about the golden ratio being 1 rod length over, the golden ratio of nymphing, 1 rod length over, and 2 rod lengths up, 2.5 rod lengths up. And there, when I stay within that golden ratio, I have excellent control over everything, and I get full use of that tight line advantage. Now, sometimes you got to go outside of that golden ratio. Sometimes you need to cast further over there. Sometimes you need to cast further upstream. And at that point, the leader can kind of take over and start to sag. Essentially, if the leader weighs more than the flies, it'll start to sag. I showed this in the golden ratio video too. If this is your rod tip, if this is your rod, this is your rod, and this is the leader. If you're within this 90-degree angle, there's no sag here and everything's okay. You can just even use a very light nymph here. But as soon as I cast out further and further, then this starts to sag too much, accidentally pulling on the flies, putting you out of control, taking away your tight line advantage. And there you go. That's exactly when and why I would float the sighter. There are other reasons, we'll get to that. But the first and probably the most frequent reason for me to float the sighter is because I have to be further away. So instead of casting now 30 feet away, 32 feet away probably there, and trying to be pure tight to it, I'm just gonna lay the sighter down. Let's talk about that. So here's the thing, this sighter, this is not a good suspension device. It doesn't support much weight. I'm gonna tell you right now, I mean, I've tested it. It'll support maybe 10 centigrams. That's about a 2 mm bead. It can support maybe 15 centigrams depending on the diameter of the sighter. I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. If I really wanna suspend something, I'm gonna use just a small yarn indicator. I could use a thingamabobber, an airlock, or a dry fly. Those are good at actually supporting weight. This is not. You can grease it up and try to really make it do something that it's not very good at, and it sometimes works. But just understand, it doesn't support much. Test it out yourself, you'll see what I mean. So it doesn't suspend much, but it is good at providing a different toe point, a different lead point. I said earlier that the rod tip, when I'm pure tight lining, is that toe point. It's where the flies are gonna track toward. Now, if I lay the sighter on the water, just like the flies would then track toward the indicator, if I lay the indicator on the water, now the flies will track toward the sighter that's on the water. That's what it's very good at. There's just some surface tension there that holds the sighter in its place. What I use this sighter for, so much more than being a suspension device, is being a placeholder. Now, I use the sighter then so much to just provide extra reach on a tight line, to sort of defeat the leader sag. One of the things to really understand about a dead drift, maybe the most important thing about a dead drift, is to keep everything in one lane. That's your fly, your tippet. If you have a second fly, the second fly in the same lane, the rest of your tippet. And now the sighter in one lane, everything in one lane. Now that's easy to do. If I cast to you, and again, I'm in that golden ratio of only one rod length over, and if I cast to you, I can easily keep everything in one lane. Good, and I'm gonna be very careful how I land it. If then I wanna cast out and across and be 45 degrees over, I can still use this floating the sighter idea, and I'll show you in a bit how I can kind of do a power curve, come around so everything lands this way. It's something that the floating the sighter allows me to do. I could do it with an indicator as well, but I want to be careful that I don't cross lanes. If I'm going to cast 45 degrees up and across, I'm not landing my sighter that way. I'm actually landing the fly first and then kicking the sighter over that way. You can see that in the video. What I just said is really important. The fly first. Everything I do out here with nymphs is always predicated on getting a fly first entry. And that starts, we say it all the time, Josh was making fun of me a minute ago, because I say this all the time. I'm going crisp stops between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. You're gonna see everything turns over and the fly hits first. Once that fly hits, then where do I wanna put the sighter? That's really, really key to this whole thing. The fly hits first, and then a half beat later, the sighter lays down. That only is going to happen if I get that fly first entry, and that is a tuck cast, or just full turnover, gets out to the end of the line, can't go any further. Fly goes down, and again, where do I want to put the sighter? If I'm working that 45-degree angle over there like that, instead of casting to you, and now I'm further and outside of my rod reach, then it's very much this. I'm casting, and then I'm reaching. I don't have to reach that far, but cast and kind of push that sighter over into position. And now, instead of everything crossing seams and getting cut through and dragged, just like you would see with a dry fly on top, everything can land in the same lane. Fly first, sighter placed downstream of it, in line too. So everything kind of changes over time. And one thing that's changed a lot for me is how I get information about rivers and streams that I want to fish. And so I've been using the Trout Routes app a lot. Trout Routes is mapping software. I think it's the best mapping software out there. It's like Google Maps for anglers. Everything you really want to know about a stream is right there for you. They have links to fly shops and surrounding support systems too. But there's a lot of, there's water data in there. There's a lot of information about each stream, anywhere you want to fish, what the wild trout population is like. They get information from the state fish commissions about population densities and things like that. So access points and whatnot. It's all public information, but now it's all in the Trout Routes app. So you can use the code Troutbitten to get 20% off your pro membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Thanks for your support. Thanks to Trout Routes for supporting this project. So floating the sighter might be the most challenging thing we need to do on a tight line, casting wise, because you can see, and I've talked about this, I want crisp stops. I want that rod to flex and push things around. That's important to me to get the full turnover. And this is what I'm saying. Right after that power stroke, if I'm casting this way, it's 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Right after I go here, then I'm going to move that rod tip where I really want it. I've exaggerated a couple times and going out like that, but that's what I'm talking about. I'm going to cast, and then I'm going to lay the sighter down. That's especially if I'm going 45 degrees up and over. But even if I don't care what angle I'm at, and if I'm backhand here, I'm going to cast and then reach that rod tip over. What's happening is the leader still has power after the fly lands. The leader still has power, it's still moving forward, it still has momentum. So the fly has landed, and then you can kick the sighter over into position. So let's talk about the leader, because that's really important. What I'm using is a standard monorig build. It's a 20-pound butt section. Well, it's actually 0.017. This is OPST laser line. We're just trying to see it today. The standard monorig build, I talk about it a lot. It has enough punch and power to push things around. That's really important in this case. You see that I'm casting it like a fly line, so it has that momentum. You can use a micro leader, absolutely. You can use a micro monorig build. You can use whatever leader build that you like. You should try it out. What happens though if you're using a micro leader, and I'm using light flies, you don't have that momentum, that push with the leader to really do that job. And then you end up starting to kind of water haul it and slinging it up. If you're water hauling, you cannot quite get that full turnover. You can get full turnover, but you can't get that momentum of the leader still wanting to keep going and get that best positioning on the sighter. Let's talk about the sighter build then too. The end of my standard monorig build has 12-pound red amnesia and 10-pound gold strand. And then just for hopefully better visibility today, I took some pink sighter material and put it at the end. The gold strand is more subtle than the opaque stuff. The gold strand is semi-translucent. I think it spooks fish a little bit less. Something people don't necessarily talk about is that if you're floating the sighter, and a lot of us will float the sighter in low water, clear water conditions, doesn't the colored line floating over top of the fish spook them? Yeah, I think it does sometimes. Now, you need to do whatever it takes to catch fish in those conditions, but that's one of the reasons I use the gold strand. It is much more subtle than an opaque line. Also, the gold strand, the 10-pound, mics out at OX, which is going to support a lot more weight than 4X, than the 4X sighter. I say a lot more. I'm talking 5 centigrams difference, 5-7 centigrams difference. That's why I choose the sighter build that I do. It's thick enough to have the power in there and to support a little bit of weight, and it's a little more subtle in color. So that's the leader, that's the sighter. The fly rod for me is a 10-foot 4-weight. It could be anything between a 9 and a 10-foot 4-weight. If I go lighter than that, I'm going to lose power. I don't like doing this with like an 11-foot 2-weight. Now that's a good rod, but it's very specialized, not really built for doing this. The 4-weight has a lot of power. You hear me saying power a lot. That matters a lot to me to get that ultimate placement, to push out light flies. I should mention this. Maybe should have mentioned this right off the bat. When I'm floating the sighter, I do it with lighter flies. You could go back and listen to a podcast we talked about. I have articles about this. 3 ways to dead drift nymphs. You could bottom bounce, actually touching the bottom. You can ride the strike zone, just gliding through that very bottom current without touching very much. And both of those, I'm going to use heavier flies, not heavy, but heavier flies, than when I'm doing the tracking approach. For me, tracking is putting the flies in the water and letting the river make the decisions. So I'm surrendering some control. I'm still trying to be tight for the most part, but I'm surrendering some control then, and most of it, trying to have very little influence and allowing the river to have the control over the flies. I call that tracking. It's a great way to do things, and this floating the sighter is a perfect companion for that kind of tracking approach. When I'm tracking, I'm using lighter flies, because with the lighter flies, I can get more leader sag sometimes, but that's what I'm saying. I'll take this tracking approach, and when I have to go outside of, let's say, 25 feet away, I'll lay the sighter down. Here's another really important thing to understand. I said it's not a good suspension device, and it's not. But what I use the sighter for is what I call a placeholder. So I'll cast it up in there. Fly goes in, sighter lays down. And let's say I lay the sighter on the water, but I'll only keep it on the water for about 5 feet, maybe 10 feet. As soon as I can, I'll lift the sighter up and then just pure tight line the rest. Remember, if it's out like this, then I could get some leader sag. So I'll go ahead and lay that sighter down. But as the fly comes back to me, then this angle becomes this and this and this. And at this point, I'll just peel that sighter off the water and pure tight line the rest. That right there is how I use it the most. And I don't even need really light flies to make that. I can do that with, I don't know, 12s and 14s, 50 centigrams, 60s, 75 centigrams, tuck it in. What's really happening is the weight of the fly or split shot hasn't really affected the sighter yet. Right at first, as the flies are dropping, they're not putting much tension on the sighter. So we might think that it's supporting weight while it's dropping, but it's not. The sighter isn't really supporting that weight until the flies kind of drop to level, maybe even start to get slowed down by the strike zone. So the sighter as a placeholder is how I use it the most. To do it 30, 35 feet away, I probably don't do it more than that. But I could cast from here, 35 feet upstream, lay the sighter on the water, drift it back, drift it back, drift it back, and then peel it off the water, tight line the rest, if I want to do that, use it to that advantage. And I could do that with a lot of different weights. So you see the water we chose to kind of really show this floating the sighter idea. This is great stuff to do it in. And this kind of calls to me to float the sighter and do a tracking approach. I want, let's say, less complex currents for floating the sighter. Now that we have line on the water, you don't have to float the whole sighter, but I probably have a foot, at least 6 inches, sometimes a foot, sometimes 2 feet of a sighter on the water. That can very easily get crossed in the currents and start getting pushed around. It could be this much line, you know, getting pushed in complex currents. By complex, I mean a current going this way and this way, like pocket water currents. So I don't float the sighter in, you know, heavy runs and riffles with a bunch of complicated currents. I could pick a soft piece in complicated water and just float a little bit of that. But I love this kind of stuff. You have even currents, an even flow. I should point out too, I'm not trying to get all the way to the bottom when I'm floating the sighter and doing the tracking idea. So this kind of water is great for it. I'll do it in flats, but not heavy runs. I'll do it in pools and tail outs and things like that, where I'm not trying to necessarily get all the way to the bottom. And I'm using lighter flies at longer distances. But it's not just for those situations. You're gonna take every tactic that you can and kind of see what problems it'll solve whenever you're out here. I think that's about it. Make sure you check out the other videos. I will leave some really important videos and resources in the description. Give it a shot. Fish hard, friends. Oh, I like it when you say action. Action. We all suffer in some way. That's a Kelly Gallup thing to say. You all right with that?
I'm all right with it.